Welcome to Entrepreneurs in Healthcare. I've come to realize that entrepreneurship discussions are long overdue in medicine. I'm pairing up with voices from healthcare that value entrepreneurship and that are willing to come on the screen with me and hold a discussion. I'm hoping that hosting these conversations will open up pathways to making progress in medicine and not making entrepreneurship a bad word. Join along on this series as we dissect entrepreneurship, healthcare, and everything in between. I am so excited to be having Alejandro Badia across from me. He is an orthopedic surgeon from Miami, and I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dana, for having me on. Yes, I'm Alejandro Badia. I'm an orthopedic hand and upper limb surgeon, practicing in Miami now almost 30 years now. But I am a New Yorker. I trained at NYU. I spent a decade there. I grew up public school kid from New Jersey, proud immigrant, born in Cuba. This country has been wonderful to me and my family. I have a long history of physicians on the maternal side of my family from Cuba, but I came back to Mecca for Cubans, so I'm here in Miami, and happy to be on the show.
Wonderful. I don't think I realized that you were an immigrant. What age did you immigrate here?
Just 1 year. That was a time when Castro was sort of starting to shut the borders, and I had to go to Spain, which was not difficult because my father's family still lives in Valencia, never left. So my dad's an only child. So all of my paternal family is in Valencia. We went to Madrid for 6 months, and I, like many immigrants, I arrived in Elizabeth, New Jersey, kind of working class town, and my family knew somebody who knew somebody, and we lived in somebody's attic or something for the first year. And the rest is history.
So before we get into the topic of entrepreneurship, which we're covering here in this show episode, I want to know what your family, I mean, we probably all know the answer to this, but what your family thinks of you now being a successful orthopedic surgeon.
Well, the cliche, my son, the doctor. I mean, fortunately, in society, despite all our challenges, I still think that our profession, fortunately, is held in high esteem. So, yeah, certainly, my family is proud. I will say, I never felt though that I was pushed into that. I was partly inspired because my mother worked. She studied teaching in Cuba, came to the U.S. and said, "Boy, these kids are unruly." In the class. This was in the 60s, right? So she always had interest in medicine due to her family. So she started working in the OR, in inhalation therapy and helping the anesthesiologist. And we would pick her up late at night. My dad would take me and to pick her up late at night. And I remember the stories, and I just got inspired. But I was never, I would say encouraged, but this has always been my own calling. I would say at about 8 years of age, I was sure that I was going to go into medicine, and specifically surgery. I'm not sure why, but yeah.
That's so interesting. It's always interesting for me to hear the backstories of the physicians that I'm regularly in touch with. Okay, so on to the topic of this episode, and that's entrepreneurs in medicine. So entrepreneurship in medicine, Dr. Badia, good or bad?
Oh, good. Very good. Terrific. It's always because I believe that people who are in the trenches should be the ones innovating, right? We're the ones who know what's needed best. So I've been passionate about that. I will say, I now would have to say I'm an entrepreneur, but the question is, right? Are they born or are they made? I don't know. I don't have that in my family, by the way. There isn't, we don't have a lot of business owners, and people, again, have been in medicine and engineers in my family, but I don't know where I got this from. All I know is that when I see something wrong, I feel like I want to fix it. It's kind of a curse, to be honest. But it's certainly in medicine, it's an incredible challenge, as we know, because I think it's one of the only, let's say, businesses where the person receiving the service is usually not the one paying for it. And that intermediary that we call the health insurance megapolis isn't that interested. They say they are, but they're really not interested in it being fixed and being better. So that's a huge challenge.
Do you think that understanding entrepreneurship and taking it on in some form can help your fellow doctors to solve some of these issues that are happening to us in healthcare?
Absolutely. But when you say fellow doctors, that's when I realize, and I want to point out that unfortunately it's very hard to get colleagues to engage. It's part of it is they're so busy and they're doing what they should be doing, right? They should be taking care of patients. Thank God in society that most physicians are really that dedicated. But at the same time, I think we need to get our head out of the sand and collaborate more. And it's very hard. I can tell you, even at my own center, the collaboration with my colleagues, even though they're very supportive of what I'm doing, they're not really rolling up their sleeves and helping. So I don't know how bad it's going to have to get with physicians retiring early and everything that we all know, and the so-called burnout. But at some point, we're really going to have to do something and work together.
Do you think that doctors in general just don't have the time? Do you think that they don't understand what's broken? Or do you think that they don't understand how we can fix it?
Hmm. Oh, I think most of us understand how it's broken. Just having to fight for authorizations and things of that nature, right? To be able to treat your patient. I think that it's kind of like a rat in a Skinner box, right? We've been shocked so much and we're no longer jumping. And that's unfortunate, is that I think we become a bit hapless and just are resigned to the system. But I really believe that we do have the power to change it. I really do. Um, in terms of, no, I think we understand it. I think we don't realize that we can change it. I think and I think before you can fix something, right? And that's kind of what my book delves into, is I wish I could say I have the blueprint. I present some ideas, including my 26 contributors at the end. But what I really want to point out to the public, not just colleagues, but to the public, is what are the problems? And I think we have to really understand those. And I think we're starting to.
Yeah, I definitely think we're starting to. I think we've been doing it for a while. I know that you've been gracious enough to contribute some of your thoughts to, for example, the magazine that we host on SoMe Docs. We've had
Yeah.
other voices too that have contributed and regularly sometimes write about. And the only thing I could say is vent about our healthcare system, and
Yeah.
not only the way that it doesn't work, but many of them present ways in which it can work.
Mhm.
So, uh, do you think that entrepreneurship can be used in a bad way by doctors and not actually help us in the situation that we're in? We'll be back after this short break. Did you know we build directories on SoMeDocs' public website at doctorsonsocialmedia.com? It's called Beyond Exam Rooms, and in it, you'll find listings of healthcare professionals' hard work, segmented into podcasts, YouTube channels, books, blogs, speakers, courses, coaches, and communities. We're helping the world to connect with these doers quicker. Find something you love and want to follow, or connect with a doctor behind that work. And look, there's Dr. Badia's book, right inside of our Books and Blogs directory, where you can purchase it and support him. Docs, and now students, can join our membership and get featured in our directories at the click of a mouse. Now back to our show. Do you think that entrepreneurship can be used in a bad way by doctors and not actually help us in the situation that we're in?
All right. Well, here I'm gonna throw up a softball. Stem cells. So there's a perfect example of how entrepreneurship sometimes can be negative. Yes, incredible stuff. I just got back from speaking at a meeting in Seville, Spain, where there was European and other invited guests, and I learned a lot. But the reality is the public has this false sense of what this emerging technology can do. And I do feel that there's a lot of opportunism in healthcare, and that's unfortunate. We do see it in that field. We see it many times in aesthetic surgery. We're seeing it now with people who are excellent internists, right? All of a sudden opening med spas, and my God, I think that's fine because we all want to make a good living. The problem is, what I'm worried about as I get older is, how many great internists are really going to stay being, because that's a really hard cerebral activity, right? Is figuring out a diagnosis. And unfortunately, it's not compensated the way it should be. So people are doing these other side gigs because bottom line is because insurance isn't involved. That's the elephant in the room. When insurance isn't involved, then we can charge fair prices, and the public is often willing to pay that. The question is, when can we get the public to understand that these other things, which are actually more challenging, require more education, that those things should be compensated well? And I think that's the real challenge. And that's where the entrepreneurism, yes, it's good. But I think there are problems that it brings out.
Yeah, I mean, you're referring to, taking advantage of patient gullibility and just really almost like, snake oil
Yeah,
sales.
fake oil. Yeah. I think taking advantage of their sense of hope. I have a friend, she's a dentist, and her daughter was born with a severely autistic. I'm not even sure what the diagnosis would be. I don't know much about it, but I remember she took her to Argentina for stem cells, at the brain level. I mean, I knew this was not going to work, but it's unfortunate. And there are people out there, and I honestly believe a lot of them believe it works. But I think we have to be, and I'm not a big, evidence-based medicine. I think we've overblown that, because I think there's a lot that we do out there that, we don't necessarily have to have chi-square analysis to know that something's working for our patients. But certainly there's these two camps of things that are sort of almost anecdotal, and then things that are overly researched, and you're trying to get through the FDA, and it's helping patients and you can't get it. So these are the challenges on both sides of the spectrum.
Absolutely. I can see how that could be. And also just in my thinking about, the physicians that are, for example, breaking free from systems and forming their own private practices, right? I'm thinking to myself, even there, it's so hard to really know, where to price things, where to price yourself.
Yeah.
The world and society at large is still used to the insurance model. And so again, that kind of puts things in a weird, place
Yeah.
where how much do you charge for yourself? And if you're not taking insurance, what happens to a patient if something disastrous happens and, their medical bills shoot through the roof and now they don't have coverage, et cetera? Um, you know, eh, eh, how do we determine pricing and things of the sort, right? Relevant to an entrepreneurship conversation when we haven't been entrepreneurs for so long. We haven't been our own bosses.
Yeah, well, that is a problem, is that we get zero of this. I was just speaking to some young physicians recently, and they're still really not getting any medical, Freudian slip, right? They're not getting any business classes or exposure during medical school. And the problem is now, my understanding, the last stats I remember reading is that about 85% of physicians coming out of residency are fully employed. When I came out in the 90s and mid 90s, it was about 6%. That's a huge difference. I mean, usually those 6% were maybe, pathologists, right, at a big healthcare system. But even radiologists, even pathologists, even hospital-based physicians like that had a private practice, a small group, right? And it was still essentially private practice. I think it's on the upswing. So I always like to kind of try to see the glass half full. And I think there is an upswing. And I'd love to proudly announce that a New Yorker, a fully trained New York, he's now at one of the big orthopedic hospitals, will be joining me in September. Now, that was a challenge for me because many of the orthopedic surgeons coming out of fellowship are employed, or either employed by big mega groups being bought by private equity, or big healthcare systems, right? And I'm not knocking either one of those, but there definitely is a place for somebody who can say, you know what? Yes, I'm going to be in network maybe with certain insurance groups, but this is what our fees are, and that we can do that. And since I'm doing that, I think that this particular young colleague had the vision, and he's got to have an entrepreneurial frame of mind to go with somebody who says, you know what, contribute to the overhead, but that's it. It's eat what you kill. And I think it's a great model. And I think it is good. I think we're going to see it coming back.
Yeah, I think that what's missing here is a mentorship sort of structure
Yeah.
that
Yep.
students and the residents and those who are who complete training, they just don't have that. They don't have the mentorship. They certainly didn't have the education. And that's part of, why we at SOMI Docs are opening a student section, because I'm
Awesome.
hoping to
Yeah.
connect them with folks like you and like others that are not only doing it yourselves, but are sort of learning as you go, perfecting it as you go, and maybe providing to those students, even as they're being educated, right? I mean, we're open to both medical students and pre-meds so that
Yeah.
we can get them early enough and we can say, hey, you can study medicine and you could go the pre-med track and study, the human body and all those really difficult topics. But while you're doing that, know that you can connect with us online and learn so much more.
Well, what I immediately comes to mind, Dana, is that I'm thinking I'd love to learn from them in terms of actual social media, right? Because they're the ones who they grew up with this. They're experts at it. We had to learn it, and you're a real expert, but I was lucky. Unfortunately, I had an employee who just suddenly left, right? Those are other challenges we have, right? With the generation. I hear this all the time from colleagues, and no 2-week notice, but I am grateful that I did learn from her a lot about social media, and it's been a priceless for educating my patients, and priceless yet at a minimal price. It's just your time. It doesn't cost anything to teach somebody about sort of arthritis is a base of the thumb on Instagram. It doesn't cost anything. So I think that this is great that you're bringing in the young people, because obviously they're going to be able to expand and amplify these messages even better than we are, because of their generation and their network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're building it and we're hoping that it takes off. We're still in initial stages. We've got, an amazing speaker series on optimizing their applications and their interviews, but we're looking at more mentorship and eventually even collaborations, because I think that that's how actually we're going to make changes, is by pairing up the older generation, the dinosaurs like you and I, right, with the
Yeah.
budding infant dinosaurs, not infant, but the
Yeah.
ones that are going to become our future doctors and the doctors of our children who
Right.
we are worried about because
Yes,
of this
we
kind
are.
of drop in internal medicine doctors and family medicine doctors, et cetera. And this as an internal medicine doctor who left clinical medicine because it's so
Right.
broken. So
Right.
I love that.
So I'm gonna interject just to show an entrepreneurial kind of activity, because I
Absolutely.
can't ignore this. So part of the Ortho Now program, right, is use technology. Right, we all do chats. We all order Ubers. We all, I mean, we all find, I found dates on on social media, right, and in apps. So we have an app. It's called Ortho Now, and I just got a little beep, and real time, I'm actually going to see what's going on. So here I am. I'm a hand surgeon. There's a walk-in orthopedic clinic, much like, like the general urgent cares, but with this expertise. So I'm getting here a 12-year-old, right, just a raised fracture on a styloid. Okay, so I already know it's a little bit angulated, but they're going to reassure the mom that a dedicated risk specialist said, yes, A waterproof cast suffices for a 12-year-old. And at that age, it needs to be on about 4 weeks. And we'll be able to tell the mom the kid can still play soccer as long as they're not the goalie and as long as they're not rough. So these are the things that in a matter of what? How long did that take? 15 seconds? I actually made a decision. Somebody's going to be in and out of our center. That is a paradigm shift. Instead of going somewhere and saying, oh, refer to ortho, now the patient has homework, or the soccer mom has homework to try to find an appointment with an orthopedist. It's crazy. So now the kid's going to walk out with a cast.
Amazing. That's a great pivot, because I was going to go there next, is to ask you about, what makes you an entrepreneur? And is there anything specific, any product, any service that you are creating or have created that puts you in the entrepreneur category?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I don't have any business background, so that's very regrettable. I would tell any young person listening, take a basic accounting course, learn how to read a P&L statement, even contracts. I've gotten burned so many times by not really having the discipline to actually read a contract. So you need to do that. But what happened with me is that when I peeled off from a group that I co-founded called Miami Hand Center. Okay. So we grew to 5 hand surgeons. Like many groups, there was issue with kind of one partner and we disbanded. I started my own center, and I realized very quickly when I was building another surgery center, I said, wow, hospitals are employing the orthopedists and hand surgeons. Pretty soon I may not get wrist fractures that I'm good at fixing and I want to fix, right? So I said, let me have my own emergency room. I was a franchisee of a general urgent care, and that was a failure. And I think in entrepreneurship, you have to be willing to fail. It's just part of it. So I lost a lot of money that year, but I learned a lot. I closed it and I reopened it and slightly changed the name to Ortho Now. The name is pretty self-explanatory, right? What I wanted to do is give the community and referral sources a place where they could send somebody directly with no appointment, but get this level of expertise. And that was just something that came out of a seeing the need, not because I said, oh, this thing's going to make a lot of money. On the contrary, it's been a long journey. So I'm not sure what's going to happen at the end of the rainbow, but my goal at this point is really for it to go national and even international. We'll be opening the first one probably sometime early next year in Santo Domingo. So there's an orthopedic surgeon who's basically going to put forward. I mean, he got investment backing. Big mistake I made. I didn't raise capital. So I bootstrapped it. So at least, but now when I speak to investors, at least I could say, look, here's my EBITDA. It's successful. I have no debt. I now own 100% of the equity because my sort of few partners in it couldn't last, didn't have the staying power. I don't blame them. But it was my sort of dream. And now, fortunately, I'm seeing I'm almost there. But you have to, I read a ton. Actually, I'm doing it all. I just got this yesterday. This is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. So it's written by Ben Horowitz, and I've heard this is tremendous. And so I've read business books, and that helps. So I think you've got to constantly be reading. I just finished Elon Musk's biography. It's about 650 pages. But God, the tenacity of that guy to say, you know what, I'm gonna go to outer space and I'm gonna change transportation on this planet. You got to admire the guy, right? And you can learn lessons from that.
Yeah, I think that some people say sometimes that it takes a personality that like almost needs to not care about anyone else to actually make it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, Walter Isaacson, I loved it so much. I'm going to start the one on Einstein next week. So Walter Isaacson ended the book on Elon Musk by basically saying, listen, you have to kind of be a certain type to be crazy enough to think you can change the world. And everybody has, pluses and minuses, pros and cons. So I think, we got to cut people a break when they do great things. And I don't know if I'd want to have a beer with them. Actually, I would. But the point is that I think you have to look at the whole thing, and it just takes a certain person to really try to change the world.
Well, let me ask you something going back to you're talking about having funded this yourself. That's an
Yeah.
interesting point. So, if you had raised capital through investors, wouldn't that sort of create the same problem that we've had until now, which is that there's private equity that would then, I mean, private equity like with you
Yeah.
in it that would own a company? Or do you think that no, for the reason you'll tell me now? We'll be right back. If you're not yet familiar with the work of Dr. Tiffany Moon, you should be. She's not only an anesthesiologist, but also an entrepreneur and even a real housewife, one of the stars in Bravo's reality shows. It is an absolute hoot following her online. Anyway, she's graciously invited me in as a speaker of the Lead Her Summit, which takes place November 8th to 10th of 2024 in Dallas, Texas. As Dr. Moon describes it, the event is tailored as an experience for the go-getters, the dream chasers, and the trailblazers. And besides, I'll be there, along with Real Housewives of Beverly Hills star Crystal Minkoff, Mega Tolia, who's the COO of Shondaland, Shonda Rhimes' company, and other esteemed speakers. So you can not only hear us all speak, but maybe even create some content with me over the weekend to circulate through SoMeDocs. SoMeDocs is an affiliate partner, so don't forget to use code SoMeDocs for $200 off. Now back to our show. Well, let me ask you something going back to you're talking about having funded this yourself. That's an interesting point. So if you had raised capital through investors, wouldn't that sort of create the same problem that we've had until now, which is that there's private equity that would then, I mean, private equity like with you in it that would own a company? Or do you think that no, for the reason you'll tell me now?
Well, no, what I would have done is tried to raise capital with sort of strategic partners, kind of what I'm doing now. The difference is back then I would have stayed with the majority ownership, right? But now I've been at it so long, I'm kind of tired. So I want to stay involved because I know that second bite of the apple could be very, very big. But at this point, because I don't want to give up, and that's a key point, I think, is I know physician entrepreneurs who gradually transition. The difference with me is I know what I'm best at is really in the operating room. So I was in surgery yesterday. That's what I love. And yes, am I potentially giving up a lot of income? Yeah, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But so if you make that decision that you're going to transition to really being a physician entrepreneur and put all your focus, obviously you're going to have better chance of success. What I should have done is just raise capital with the right type of people who would have interest in seeing it succeed. So I wouldn't call it dumb money. It's maybe a bad term, but dumb money is where you just raise capital and you owe them later, right? But they're not helping. You want to I think you want to raise capital with people who can help, beat the drum, and will make introductions and will help the business move along.
Of course. And I do know that there's sort of this growing resentment in the healthcare field and a lot of arguments over bringing strategic partners, for example, into the table, and then maybe watering down the physicians that are involved and maybe bringing in sort of alternate practitioners to physicians. I know that that's a big, issue is do we, are we in a shortage, and do we need to bring in others that work for the physicians, or do we really just make sure that it's authentically physicians that are giving the orthopedic care? Again, even if there's, for example, like NPs helping in the office in the appropriate ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually have a really strong feelings about this. I've had a physician assistant almost since the late 90s. And I had the first one worked with me for 11 years. The second one resigned to go to a group, wanted to work a little less, and was building a family. And I had her for 12 years. So out of my 28 years in practice, just two people. And they were my right hand. And I can tell you, they knew more about hand and wrist than my colleague who does foot and ankle. Just like the PA of my spine surgery colleague knows a lot more about spine than I do, even though I'm an orthopedic surgeon, right? So I think our mid-level colleagues nurse practitioners, PAs, this spectrum, I think are going to be invaluable because we are going to be about 140,000 physicians short in the coming decade. We're seeing it already. They're critical. They're critical to ortho now. And I remember having a physician who was sort of family practice, but then did a year of sports medicine. He literally didn't know orthopedics very well. I think the ortho PAs, a person who sent that x-ray, already kind of knew what I was going to say. But if it was a fracture that needed surgery, they would know that too. And that's when I come in and I would maybe be adding it on to my schedule for tomorrow, that sort of thing. So I think it's critical. They don't have the extent of training that we have, so they need oversight, right? And as long as we kind of each know our place, just like our nurses. I mean, the nursing shortage is projected to be about 400 to 500,000. That's real trouble, right? And there's a ton of things that nurses do that I do not know how to do. So I think that this is, we have to work through this. We really do. And part of it is how, I think you used the word, our healthcare system kind of is broken in many ways, even though we have some of the best technology in the world, is how we deliver it is terribly inefficient. And that's leading people to either not go into it or leave the profession early. And I think that's what we have to really change.
Absolutely. I think that, what you're saying also is that just everyone's got a role and they're all
Absolutely.
sort of important for the team. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people do agree with that. So just kind of going back to ortho now, what's the model of it that you're growing? Is it like an urgent care center just for orthopedic injuries, or can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, I'm glad. And so it's funny. It's always really intelligent people who ask me about ortho now and say it's for injuries, right? Why? Because it's urgent. No. So that's why we don't use the tagline. It's ortho now, immediate orthopedic care. So think about the difference. And the reason is that our data analytics, which is part of what's for sale, right? We have it for about 12, 13 years with the same EMR system. The data shows that 70% of people walk or limp in to ortho now because of pain. It's not urgent. So the number one diagnosis almost every month is right knee pain. It's that granular. And that knee pain is usually not due to, a football injury last week. It's people like you and I who, boy, my knee's been bugging me for the last month. I can't get in to see the orthopedist. They want me to wait 3 weeks. I'm limping now. My friend told me about ortho now, where I found it. I Googled it and I went in. That is really what the model, that's what it serves in the community, is the easy access. Yes, we're fantastic for what you just saw. A 12-year-old fell playing soccer. I bet you, though, that kid was brought in by his mother last night to our local excellent children's hospital or a general urgent care. But neither one of those places is really going to put on an immediate cast and have them in and out in an hour. That's the difference. But in the end, it's not just about injury. It's about any musculoskeletal problem. And that's a huge part of healthcare, especially as we age and as we continue to be more active with, whether it be running or pickleball. I wrote an article, a national article about the 5 most common injuries in pickleball. And none of them involved what I do. None of them were, wrist or hand. But these are things that we see at ortho now.
Fantastic. And you're expanding. Can you tell us
Yeah.
how many offices you now have?
I wish the number was great. What happened is we started as a franchise, and I think a lot of healthcare is a little bit too complicated to franchise. It's not making a hamburger or, opening a gym. It's more complicated as healthcare is. So we pivoted. We had about 8 or 9. We had 2 in Georgia, 1 in Orlando, and also poor franchisee selection, to be very candid. So what happened is we peeled that back, and we now have a licensing program where in the Dominican Republic, right, there's going to be 4. There's 1 open in Wyoming. There's 1 opening in Anchorage, Alaska. But if you notice that I didn't say New York or Philly or Chicago, because we really don't think the licensing model is optimal either. I want it to be a corporate owned entity with regional joint ventures, most likely. But I think that the corporate store has to really oversee the whole thing, and we have to have control. And also economically, it's much better. We put in all this work to license it. It's not, you don't get a lot of bang for your buck there. It's better that we co-own it. Very similar to the ambulatory surgery center model, where there are national companies that have hundreds of surgery centers and they co-own them with the surgeons who bring cases to the center.
Meaning that the physicians have a more active role
Yes.
in, you know,
Oh, I think it's
running
critical.
this.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, any strategic partner that I engage, and like I said, we're potentially very close with a few. We're going to start negotiating soon, I think. I've made it very clear that the local orthopedic surgeons have to be involved and have to benefit. Now, the biggest benefit to them is they're going to get that wrist fracture that needs to be fixed. That's not Ortho Now. Ortho Now does not do surgery. Ortho Now is the intake, the walk-in component, that is, open extended hours, open weekends, etc. But the fact that local surgeons would be involved in it, or maybe have an economic stake, I think is good for everybody.
All right. Well, that clearly requires entrepreneurial skills to
Yes.
talk through, to think through. Do
Yeah.
you think that some of the, I think you mentioned this earlier, maybe it was off camera, but do you think some of the failures that you've experienced have actually made you into a stronger career man, professional, and also entrepreneur?
Yes. Well, everything I've read about the overall, topic of entrepreneurism, first and foremost, is you can't have fear of failure. And the reason being is almost no entrepreneur, hits it from the beginning. I mean, Jeff Bezos, right, actually went to public school here in Miami. And, if you read a little bit about his early years in that, I mean, it's a struggle. And most of the entrepreneurs, and now I don't know in his case, for example, but I'm sure he did some other things that probably failed along the way. So I think that's just part of it. But again, educating yourself as much as possible and being willing to endure that failure is really part of the equation.
Yeah, I think I've read about him before. He was raised in a broken family, in a broken household, I believe, maybe a single mom household. I don't remember, but he then went
Yep.
to Princeton, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I still, I recall that photo of his office, like that really messy little office where he had papers thrown all about, and he had this like idea of selling books,
Yeah.
and people were kind of laughing at him, like selling books, that was the era of Barnes and Noble and
Right.
those things. And they were like, what are you talking about?
I know, incredible. Yeah, he's so what I understand, I believe it's his mother that's Cuban also. So it's like me and his parents. Yeah. So my parents, I won't say broken, but my parents divorced when I was 8. I was with my dad yesterday. So came back from New Jersey to Miami because I'm here. And my sister lives in North Carolina. But both my parents were always very supportive and there. So, it's not every divorced household that's necessarily broken, right? But I don't know his story, but certainly being self-sufficient, and that's something that we want to teach our kids, right? I have 2 teenagers, and I mean, I could really give them a totally gilded life, and yeah, we take the boat out and things like that, but I think it's important to struggle a bit, and that certainly makes you stronger.
Absolutely. And to clarify, I didn't mean that it was broken because of a divorce. I
Yeah,
meant it was broken because I read that there were some struggles that I just can't recall
yeah,
during
yeah. I'm not
childhood.
sure.
Yeah,
I'll,
yeah. I
I'll
don't
read
know.
about him
We'll
next.
need to look it up. That's right.
Yeah.
The other question I have for you, which is interesting, is you're talking about immigrants. I'm curious if you think that maybe immigrants possess that maybe like success drive and maybe even that entrepreneurial drive a bit more than non-immigrants.
Well, I think so. If you look, I've been reading a lot of stats lately because, of course, and I think things get misconstrued a bit in the media, unfortunately. But obviously, there is, we do have an immigrant crisis because this thing has to be controlled. I mean, when I came here, we had to do the paperwork, and again, we went to Spain. I remember we were waiting there, and that process is really arduous for people. And I actually feel for Mexican Americans because they've been such strong contributors in the Texas and Arizona and California economy. And of course, now we have these issues, and people kind of tend to lump groups, and that's unfortunate. But to answer your question, if you look, I think, at the stats, yes, immigrants, maybe because they have to have a higher rate of opening businesses and that sort of thing. And you see it and by the way, I'd like to give a plug for the UK, which has been under attack. But in the UK, it's amazing. The Economist magazine, where I get most of my news, just had a wonderful article talking about immigrants in the UK, about how much more they're doing than actually the local Brits, because of they've had to. So I think that's important, is for society to be welcoming, as long as it's done in the right and legal way, of course. So we all kind of, the world is a village, right? And we can learn from each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why I enjoy so much all the social media work that's out there, all the news
Yes.
agencies and the different way that now we're interpreting the news, and the news is being challenged, and
Yeah.
life's not boring right now.
No, it isn't.
Right.
It
All
is.
right.
But people, yes, okay, now we have, there's basically 3 significant wars going on. This has unfortunately been throughout history, and it's sad. But I will say, if somebody wants to read an uplifting book, I read this, gosh, a good 15 years ago. It's called Factfulness, and Factfulness talks about, it's a guy from the World Health Organization and was with the UN, and wrote this book about the fact that we've actually haven't been better off in society. If you look even in the world, I mean, when we were kids, right, Dana, you would see these, kids, African kids with the bellies, right, and starvation. I mean, you don't have the worldwide famine that we had only 20, 30 years ago. So there's a lot of positive, and hopefully we can focus on that and try to solve the challenges. But the world we should look at the world being in a good place, and let's try to keep making it better, right?
Amen. I hope so. So before we close, I want to just mention to those that are listening that Dr. Badia is multifaceted, and that we will be thrilled to have him back on one of our other shows. Specifically, I'm thinking you'd be a great guest in Side Ventures, because Dr. Badia wrote a book. So we're going to have him back to talk about,
A
the
lot of
writing
authors, right?
process.
A lot of
Yeah,
authors in so many
tons.
docs. I've been amazed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a ton of authors. And so we're
Yeah.
going to be featuring that as a side venture, that in and of itself. And again, maybe dissecting some of the articles that you've got published in our magazine, which we're trying to do a lot more of as well. We just had Diana Londoño on to dissect her article, and we plan on having many others as well. So what I'm saying is, we'd love to have you back.
Well, it would be a privilege and an honor, really. It's I think what you're doing in terms of being able to transmit this information amongst physicians, and leveraging what is, for many of us, right, a fairly new paradigm, is wonderful. So I would love to be back.
Amazing. All right. I'll take your word for it.
For sure.
And yeah, we'll have you back. Perfect. So this concludes this episode. Dr. Badia, thank you so much for joining. Are there any parting words, or maybe like an ask that you want to leave us with?
I would say that we need to collaborate more. We need, I even mentioned this, I don't, these things come to you as an author, but I remember specifically saying in my book, we need to put the competition in organic chemistry behind us. That was the weed out course, right? When we were pre-meds. And it started this idea of competition. And that shouldn't be our competition. Our competition really, unfortunately, has to be to insurance companies, and try to get them we need our incentives to be aligned. But we can't align incentives with insurance companies and big healthcare systems and big pharma, et cetera, if we are not aligned. So I think we have to kind of change our mindset. And I think it will happen.
I love that. And I echo it. And just as a final word to add my own 2 cents on it, as somebody that is building, you know, a business where it comes to like a media site at doctorsonsocialmedia.com, is that I encounter this all the time, that sort of competitive nature. And there's really good things that come out of being
Yeah.
competitive, right? Competitive drive leads to success. That said, I think we do need to come to the table a bit more, even with those that we deem competitors, right? Where we have a shared mission, and sort of really identify the things that we do share and bring our talents to the table and figure out how we can work more together. Like you said, it's the collaboration that we have to figure out if it's possible. And so I definitely second your words. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Gonna have you back. And that's it. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening.